Hello, I'm here to give a quick intro to Project Graffiti. So, with Graffiti, it's essentially all about helping you to find and describe the resources in your cloud. In a basic sense, Graffiti provides cross-service metadata tagging and search aggregation for your cloud resources. The higher level goal of Graffiti is for OpenStack users to be able to declare the capabilities and things like service level objectives that they require, and then for them to get guided in selecting those actual cloud resources. So if we take a look at the launch instance wizard today, and this is just one example, users are immediately introduced to a very technical screen, and they're doing things like choosing where they want to boot from. So it's saying I have to already know about booting from volumes, and I have to go searching through these to go and find something that matches what I want. Rather than being presented with the ability to say, I desire these capabilities from an instance. So for example, I would like to boot a LAMP stack that has a certain version of Apache or MySQL or a certain operating system. And there's not really an ability for them to do that today. So with Project Graffiti, we've started looking at some proof of concepts that will help us to better explain some of our ideas and to also hopefully get some interactive feedback from everybody so that we can learn where we might be able to make a difference right away. So there's two blueprints that we're working on. One's a faceted search and the other one's a widget for managing tags. Um, if we take a look at this today and it's like, okay, I'm presented with what kind of boot source I want. What if instead you came into a launch wizard and you were able to say, hey, I just desire Apache or desire Ubuntu, and it actually helped you guide those. So what we have is a proof of concept screen. This is just running against an actual database, part of the Graffiti architecture, but it's more to help explore the ideas and explain them. So if I'm looking for this and I want to find something that has Apache on it, I would simply just say, hey, I need this capability. And it would come open and show me all of the possible things that have Apache on it. And I could look in here and say, oh, there's volumes, there's images, and volume snapshots, all which have Apache. And I could say, you know what? I really only want those that have Ubuntu. So we'll go, okay, Ubuntu. Oh, okay, now I've limited it down a little bit further. And you can see things that come up here, and under the covers, Graffiti is actually using property metadata that's common, such as the OS distro is equal to Ubuntu. Now let's say we actually want to do something like filter it further. We can see I'm interested in something that has Apache 2.4.2.4.9 on it, and we'll search for that. So we set those properties, and you can see we're able to limit it down. Now we can see I've got a volume that has it, I've got a volume snapshot that has it, and I've got an image that has it. And I could select that thing to actually launch it. So that gives you the idea of what you might be able to do with a search that is actually pretty powerful and allows you to really choose the very specific details of what it is that you want to search and allows you to go across your various providers of resources. So let's talk about the next aspect. We have this thing called widget for managing tags and other metadata. So let me show you a quick demo of that aspect. So if we come down in here and we go into our images, we've added this new tab here that we are exploring with. And this tab is called Edit Your Capabilities and Requirements. This tab is actually now pulling open a set of things that allow you to tag metadata onto your various resources. So for example, in this case, if I wanted to say add Ubuntu to the system, I could just search for it. I see, okay, there's Ubuntu, and I tag it over. What Graffiti is doing with this is it's actually taking this and helping you to map it to the required properties. So you can see here the OS distro field is set to Ubuntu, and the OS version field is something else that you could put in here. So they're related properties, and it's very likely you would be setting them together. The other thing that it does is it allows you to do more of an exploration on your available metadata. So for example, if I'm coming out here and say I wanted to add stuff, I can say, oh, well, here's what's visible. I can have, oh, CPU architecture, and maybe I would scroll down and find something like, oh, there's x86, and I have a description of what it is. And just like that, I've effectively tagged that metadata over, and underneath the covers, Graffiti is going to set the appropriate properties onto the resource. The other thing that is nice is that it will allow you to do more exploration. So like if I'm an advanced user, I can do things like saying, hey, I would like to set some libvirt driver options. Pull these things over, and I simply can open it up, take a look, and here's all the available things that are possible. We can also do some fun things like set some categories. We'll just say this thing is in a category, and effectively tag it over onto this system. So once it's on there, Graffiti will take care of saving it down onto that resource appropriately for that kind of resource and that resource provider. So what this allows us to do is to reuse the widget on different kinds of resources. So for example, if we go to our volumes here, you can see that we've got some volumes listed here, and we can just launch the Edit Capabilities widget, where we'll be able to load in the data required to tag on this resource as well. From here, it's the exact same process. So if I wanted to come onto this thing and say that this is also, say, capable of actually, let's do something else, Fedora, we could just tag that over, and it's the same basic process across these different kinds of resources. So let's talk about what enables that common functionality to happen. The basic process is you define your metadata types, you tag that onto your resources, and then you find your resources based on that metadata. And Graffiti takes care of mapping between your metadata providers as well as your services that can store metadata about their various types. So for example, in the dictionary API, we either have the local repository, or we can aggregate from services that provide those metadata definitions. So if Nova were to expose an API for us to get the available scheduler hints, then we would be able to pull that in and surface that up through the API so that the widget wouldn't have to worry about where the source of that data is. Similarly, down when you're actually doing the tagging and the searching, we intend to be able to go across your different service types, so whether that's Glance, Cinder, Nova, or some other service, or we also have a local Graffiti resource registry, and find and tag that metadata in and out of those services. We're also interested in making a plugin for a resource cache that would allow fast response times across these various service types. So let's drill down just a little on the Graffiti Dictionary API. We do have a proof of concept UI that front ends that today, and I want to talk about a couple of concepts. First one is the notion of a namespace. A namespace is just a container of capabilities as well as their properties, and it allows you to obviously separate their names because you're putting them into a namespace, but it is also how we control some of the visibility. So for example, a project could define a namespace, put their capabilities on it, and only make that thing visible to that project. So if I'm going to go and tag my resources, I can put my capabilities onto those resources and not worry about overlapping with other projects and what maybe names or metadata tags they care about. Within a namespace, we have essentially the definition of the capabilities. A capability is really just a grouping of the properties. So if we expand these things out and we want to say drill down into one of those, maybe we want to drill down into say the libvirt driver options, we can look at that and you can see what it is it's got properties on it. These properties can have constraints, and effectively you can add and remove them. And so this allows users to define their own namespace of capabilities and properties that they care about. One aspect that we actually cared about was the notion that I would like to find certain kinds of resources based off of what type they are. So for example, I could say I want to tag something with being big data. Maybe I have an image that has Mongo in it. I could tag it as being big data, or I could tag it with saying something that has to do with source control. But the point is, when I tag it with big data, I could later search for it and say, hey, can you find me everything that's of type software infrastructure? And it would find anything that has been tagged with these kind of properties. And Graffiti takes care of mapping that in and out of the actual metadata on the various types of resources that it supports. So if we go through reverse again and look at this whole process, let's look how this could be used in other ways. So let's just say I have a samples namespace, and in there I've put in something called GPU and SSD. I could then go to, say, image and say, you know what, this thing is something that requires a GPU and I need SSD. Maybe I'm doing something like Bitcoin mining or something. So once I've got those tagged on there, I've effectively said that this image requires, or this software requires something that can provide a GPU and an SSD. So how would I find that? The idea is when you're doing your resource lookups, I could look for things that say, I could look for flavors that provide GPU. So if you look over here, I've got a whole bunch of flavors. I got some sort of S1 and G1 and things. Say, give me all the flavors that give me a GPU. So here we go. Oh, now I've limited it down to these ones that give me it. See, they matched on GPU and flavor. Now let me say, give me all the ones that also provide SSD. And so what this has done now is it shows me here I have these three that can give me SSD and a GPU. Now the beauty of this is that if you use this same essential format or system, you can use the same metadata vocabulary throughout the entire cloud. So if I had GPU and SSD as capabilities and those map to say some key value pair, I could use that to say describe host aggregates. So if we're in my host aggregate screen, I want to tag this host aggregate with having GPU and SSD, I could just add that as the capability to the host aggregate. The Graffiti would save that down into the key value pairs for that host aggregate. Then when I go and create flavors and I want to create a flavor that's capable of SSD and GPU, I pull that those capabilities from the Graffiti dictionary. I tag the flavor with that, both GPU and SSD. That ensures that when you create that flavor, the extra specs get set with the right settings. And then finally, all the way back out to when I'm actually tagging, say, my volumes or my images or something, if they require, say, GPU and SSD, I can tag that or that image and saying this requires GPU and SSD. And what I've just done is I've taken it all the way from host aggregates out to flavors, out to my actual resources, to something that can be launched into an instance and says, I require this capability. And we're able to use that same vocabulary across your different providers, whether it's Glance, Nova, Cinder, and tag it appropriately so that you're creating this reusable contract of definitions all the way from your admins out to your end users, and ultimately can facilitate a simpler launch experience for that end user. So we think that Graffiti's got some interesting concepts. We know we're certainly going to have some challenges, and we're going to have a design session at the Juno Summit where we would love to talk more about it and get some input, and we look forward to working with everybody in the community. Thank you very much.